Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. As you heard, we have a couple of awesome individuals on the line today. Lynn and Kristen, whoever wants to go first, if y'all could introduce yourselves a little bit more. You guys had awesome write-ups. Just give us a little bit more of an introduction about yourself and then expand a little bit about on why you became or how you became interested in climate and environmental justice.
Lynn, you can go first.
Okay, yeah. Hi, I'm Lynn. I'm 18 years old. I currently live in Lexington, Kentucky. Yeah, I've always been interested in science, and like throughout my youth, whenever I was in science classes and we would talk about climate change and how it has been happening, we've known about it for decades, and we've known about the effects of fossil fuels. But even though we know and we have solutions ready, I was frustrated that we hadn't taken them into action. So that's part of why I started getting involved in climate change activism. Another reason I got involved is because I noticed how frontline communities around the world, specifically Black and Indigenous people, are more likely to feel the impacts of climate. Okay, so climate change accelerates natural disasters. So people who are at a socioeconomic disadvantage are going to feel that a lot more than everyone else. And that is the reason why I'm really driven in this movement.
Awesome. Thank you. And Kristen?
Hi, everybody. I'm Kristen Hamilton. I live in Richmond, Virginia. I'm 19 years old. I'm currently in college. I go to Virginia Commonwealth University, and I'm studying political science and media studies. I've been a part of Zero Hour basically since we have started. I was one of the logistics team members on the very first Youth Climate March in July of 2018. And that was just an amazing experience. And I loved organizing with a bunch of young people that were, looked exactly like me, just as diverse as some other peers that I might have. And I love that we were organizing around something that I felt very passionate about. Before then, I organized a lot with, Black Lives Matter movement and March for Our Lives as well. I was like a chapter coordinator for March for Our Lives, but I like to say that I really didn't find my place within a social justice movement until I found Zero Hour. I didn't really know what I was getting myself into when I signed up to help them on the Youth Climate March. I was like, okay, they're a youth climate organization, that's really cool, but I didn't really understand everything that they were fighting for. It's this really funny joke within the organization that the first day that I actually read, sat down and read the principles and the guidelines, was the day of the march. I was like, maybe I should figure out who I'm working for right now. And I sat down and I read them with my parents, and I was like, this is actually really cool. I really believe in this. I think this is such a great opportunity for young people to, work in climate activism, and we could do so much more with this. And I really loved it. And I sort of fell in love with the organization back then in 2018. And since then, it's sort of been a whirlwind, and I'm the volunteer management director. So get to see all the new people that want to be a part of it. So it's been really awesome.
Awesome. It's really impressive talking to each of you being 18 and 19. It makes me think of what I was doing only 10 years ago, and it was not standing up for environmental and climate justice, that's for sure. So glad I'm here now and talking to y'all. So Kristen, you did a good job of kind of laying up the next question I had, talking about getting involved in something that you believe in and at such a young age, and that maybe you should read about what the organization stood for as you head to the march, right? I've had a couple moments like that in my life. Can you tell us just a little bit more about Zero Hour? Just, give us a grand introduction into the organization, and anyone that would be looking to join y'all, what would they be joining?
Yeah, so Zero Hour is really different from a lot of other climate organizations that are out there in the way that it is led by women of color. We pride ourselves in having 2 women of color as our executive directors, a majority of our director board being women of color, and also under the age of 20, so 20 and under. And so we really pride ourselves on being like that. We have been around, like I said, since 2017, but we had our first Youth Climate March in 2018. Since then, we've helped organize a bunch of like the major strikes around the United States and internationally. Both the September 20th March, September 20th strikes from last year, and then the March, I believe it was 16 strikes from the year prior to that. We had a big hand in helping out with those. We've also had our Youth Climate Summit in Miami, Florida, where we, like all of us, like the director board, went down to Miami, Florida, connected with a lot of the local youth and the community there, and taught them and learned a lot from them about like the climate situation going down there. Also having a hand in having Miami, Florida announced that they are declaring a climate emergency. So that was a really big step in the right direction for us as an org. I guess a lot of what we do is education. Over the course of the pandemic, we focus a lot on educating not only youth, but just like everybody about like the roots of climate change. One of our most popular like webinars and series was something called Getting to the Roots of Climate Change, where we just went over like the 4 roots of the climate crisis issue. So that was racism, the patriarchy, colonialism, and capitalism. So we just went into why those were the root causes of the climate crisis. And that was something that was really popular with a lot of people. And we've just been doing education webinars after education webinars after that, because we realized that like education is really what people need. They don't really understand what the climate crisis is because they don't know that it's affecting them. So if you educate people, that would be the best way to do that. So yeah, we do a lot of that stuff, and we're always getting more people onto our org, you know, internationally, nationally, we're always looking for more people. So it's a great org to be a part of.
Awesome. And Lynn, I see you excitedly shaking your head. Is there anything, any extra flavor you'd want to add on there of your experience at 0 Hour thus far?
Yeah, I definitely want to echo what Kristen said. I started out at 0 Hour early in 2020 as an ambassador, which anyone can do. You can get on the website and sign up to be an ambassador, and you get the Getting to the Roots training. So you can learn a lot more about how exactly capitalism, patriarchy, colonialism, and racism are intersected, and how they create a culture where the climate crisis happens, and like how that comes to be.
Awesome. Thank you so much for adding that. That's great. I'll have to check that out after this call. Yeah, so I feel like now I know a little bit about 0 Hour and know a little bit about each of you. One thing that I'm personally wondering, and we talked a little bit about prior to this, is with my own experience, I actually live in a motorhome and travel around North America, and I work remotely. So I guess I've taken remote work to the extreme, if you will. But one of the things that I've realized in that move is that it's also helped me to realize how much water I use, how much trash I generate. Some of the things that come to mind when I think about the climate crisis, however, Kristen hit the nail on the head, in my opinion, is that education is the most important, right? It's something that keeps me as an individual from getting more involved, because I sometimes feel I feel intimidated by the scope of the problem, and like that it's too late, that I can't help. So I'd love to hear from each of you, you know, talk to me, talk to everyone else out there in the world. What are some ways that we can get involved on maybe like a day-to-day level? What are some of the things we can do every day to take steps in the right direction and help support this cause, when maybe the most common objection is like, I don't have time to do this much, or I don't have the resources, or I don't have the ability?
Lynn, you could start with this one.
That's a tough question, because like there are some things you can do individually to help be more sustainable in the climate movement, but it's also important that we have a larger change in like the way our economy runs. Kristen, do you want to talk more about the Green New Deal?
Yeah, I sort of like this question because a lot of what people usually think is like what you were saying, like, what's the point of me doing this? And like, it's too late and whatever. I think like in terms of the climate crisis, at this point, it's like never too late to like figure out like how you can help. There are obviously individual actions that people can do to get their carbon footprint down, you know, using the public transportation more, walking more, eating less meat sometimes, taking showers that don't last as long. You know, there are those like easy things that you can do. However, a lot of where the climate crisis stems from is like the way that the world sort of has been living for the past umpteen thousand years. It's just like not a sustainable way, you know? So if we sort of look at the ways that our original like economy works and like how our original systems work, we could sort of get to the root as to why the climate crisis is happening. A lot of like fossil fuel emissions come from fossil fuel industry, and that is like very intertwined with the American economy and the world economy, honestly. So there are those easy things that you can fix like on a small scale for yourself, but just know that like if you feel really bad about, you know, not biking somewhere or taking or driving somewhere one day, it's honestly like not you that's causing this big issue. Like you doing that one day is not going to be, you know, harm the world forever. It is like these bigger industries, these bigger companies that are profiting off of the climate crisis and profiting off of the way that we are living unsustainably, that are really causing these issues.
Right. I think if corporations divested from the fossil fuel industry, that would be a major shift.
Sure. Yeah, you guys are talking about some big changes that we obviously need there. You know, it makes me wonder, I guess, on my own personal agenda or from my own personal perspective, how can you help me to understand what that would look like for let's say even just me, like my next steps out of this call? What are some ways that I can help to getting involved in 0 hour? But also, you know, are there other things that I can do as an individual, as a full-time working individual, so on and so forth, to help further the movement that y'all are bringing up for today's conversation?
Yeah, I think there are definitely a lot of ways that people can do stuff now. I know with like you said, like sometimes with people that have like full-time jobs, it's like hard for them to go out of their way and like do a lot of things. I think right now, a lot of what 0 Hour is focusing on is like local governments and like local elections. So like if that means that, you know, finding your representative in your area and writing a letter or calling them and being like, these are the things that I would like changed in my community. I would like you to co-sponsor the Green New Deal. That is an up and coming like bill in Congress that goes over like how we can sort of shift away from the economy and capitalist way that we've been doing things so far. But yeah, if you could like writing a letter to your elected official, or like your mayor or your US representative or your congressman, you know, writing a letter or calling them at any time, just being like, hey, these are the things that I'd like to change. These are the things that I don't like that I see within my community. I would like you to go off into Congress and like fight for those. That's just a really great way. A lot of people are just like, no, it doesn't make sense. Like they're not going to actually read that. But doing those things really do have an effect on people. And Congress people really do usually, you know, take the time and like read over what their constituents want, because at the end of the day, you know, they're representative of the American people. They're representative of the people that they are a representative of. So like if you like ask them to do something, they should really take that into consideration. So keep on asking, keep on talking to them, keep on writing those letters, keep on, you know, calling their offices and talking to their really annoyed assistants and stuff, and just keep on doing stuff like that, because at some point they'll have to listen. Lynn?
Right. If enough people are pressuring our representatives, then like eventually they can't look away from it and they'll see the problem for what it is.
Sure. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And And taking it back to working professionals, how would y'all suggest that companies get involved? What are some steps that organizations and corporations can do, or me as an employee, that I can ask my company, and not only my representative, but also reaching out to the leadership teams at my company? What can I be asking them to do to get involved?
I think one way to help is to set up a donation to Zero Hour or any other climate-related organization to really support frontline youth who are working in this space.
Yeah, and there are also like a lot of ways that companies can divest from the fossil fuel industry. Like I said, a lot of what happens is like banks and the money that the people, like if you put your money into a bank, that bank is definitely invested in the fossil fuel industry and gaining money from the amount of fossil fuel emissions that we are getting. So, you know, asking your company to be like, to divest from the fossil fuel industry. A lot of that is also happening with a lot of colleges and universities where students are asking their schools to divest. You know, a couple of months ago, or maybe it was last year, when Harvard, you know, stopped one of the football games, it was like, we're asking our school to divest from the fossil fuel industry. You know, that was like such a big thing because so many companies and so many corporations are invested. So, you know, just asking your company to divest is like a really easy, like sort of, not really easy, but like a first step that is pretty cool to take, I think. So yeah.
Yeah, no, thank you both for your perspective on that. And, you know, just out of my own curiosity here, how did you both get your start in something so, I guess, in such a big change? I guess when I hate to sound cliche, but when I was your age, only 10 years ago, when I was 18 or 19, I cared about climate change and I cared about the effects it has, but I wasn't aware of what was causing it or necessarily motivated at the time to seek that out and understand it. What would you attribute your motivation to find Zero Hour and find this cause? Who wants to go first?
I can go first. I think for me, it was a good kind of peer pressure because it was 2019 during the climate strikes, and I knew a lot of people who were getting involved. So I thought, wait a minute, I should be doing something too. So I started looking for a local organization that I could be part of, but I couldn't find any local ones, but I found Zero Hour, and that was a great starting point for me.
For me, it was a little bit different. I think I was like, before I was mentioning, I did a lot of hopping around and sort of found my place within climate justice. Before I think it was like my sophomore or junior year, I was getting very involved with like the Black Lives Matter movement. That's something that I felt very passionate about, you know, seeing all these people, people of color, Black people being killed by police in the streets was just very devastating to watch, especially someone that has a little Black brother and a Black dad. You know, like if you think about like putting yourselves in those situations and your family in that situation, like what would it be like? So that was something that I felt very passionate about. I, you know, was looking a lot locally and doing a lot of work. I'm originally from Northern Virginia, McLean, so I did a lot of work in DC. I was part of Black Lives Matter DC, and that was just like a great experience for me. And the people there were just super nice. And I just loved collaborating with people of color all the time. After that, it was like sort of these times where like things sort of drift off and they like get a little bit slower and there's not as much work within the organization or within the chapter. And during that time, I found myself thinking a lot about like what was next for me as like an organizer. Like I still wanted to focus on Black lives and protecting Black lives, but like where can I go from here? That summer, I got involved in this organization called DC Local Ambassadors, where we basically just helped like volunteer a lot of help with volunteering with a lot of the local marches that were going on in the DC area. So I got to like meet a lot of people. And during that time, you know, 0 Hour came and was like, hey, we're planning on doing this march here. What can you tell us about DC because you live on the ground? So that's sort of where I started, where I was helping a lot with logistics. And like I said, I was reading the day of the march, I was reading the guidelines and the principles. And it was really interesting because I was sitting there and I was really like, this is basically what's been in my brain, you know, the last 2 years, the last however long I've realized that like young people have a voice, you know, it's been in my brain. Like all of these thoughts are basically on a page, you know, they explicitly saying that like Black Lives Matter and explicitly saying that like Indigenous rights matters and we should uphold treaties, you know, talking about how climate justice and climate change isn't just something that is like the water falling from the sky randomly at random times, or it's like too hot on one day. It's more than that. It's like Hurricane Katrina and how Hurricane Katrina impacts an enormous amount of Black people, but like that was because an enormous amount of Black people didn't have the resources to even come back from that. Like that's sort of where those intertwined. And that was something that I felt very passionate about because when you're talking about protecting Black lives, it's not just like protecting it from people and protecting it, you have to protect it like as a whole and protecting people that live on this earth as a whole. So I felt like that was something that I wanted to be a part of. So, yeah.
Yeah, wow, wonderful answers. Thank you both. Yeah, I guess talking about getting more involved and talking about how involved you have both become at such a young age, it makes me think, you know, I guess it really challenges me sitting here thinking before this call that I'm not that involved, and just having a simple conversation and listing out a few things that we can do is pretty simple, right? If everybody just takes a first step or a couple steps together, and then we all up level together. I think that's really cool that y'all pointed that out. And, you know, another thing that I'm curious about, and that I hear from friends of mine as well, and I'll give you a personal example. I don't eat a whole lot of meat. I wouldn't call myself plant-based wholly yet. It's been a difficult transition. However, where I'm going with this is sometimes when I go out to eat with people or I go over to friends' houses, I have a hard time figuring out how to communicate what I believe in and why I'm doing something without being pushy or rubbing them the wrong way. I want to inspire them to do the things that I'm doing, right? I don't want to shame them for what it is that they're doing that's different than I am. How can you both tell me how you have thought about this and how you approach it with your friends, colleagues, peers, people that you meet in Walmart, I don't know, that ask, you know, hey, I noticed you were doing this. Why? Like, what's your approach to politely position climate activism and environmental justice to people that aren't necessarily 100% there yet, that aren't 100% willing to hear what it is that you have to say just yet?
I think
Tough
a
one.
good place to start is speaking from personal experiences and straying away from politicized language, which might deter people from the start. Like if you know someone who is impacted by a hurricane or a wildfire or anything like that, then it's an easier way to tie into the conversation about climate change.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Like if we are seeing people, like I know I think, yeah, this past summer is when like all of the wildfires were happening, you know, all over the world basically. And it was like you couldn't go a day without seeing that was happening. yeah, you couldn't go a day without seeing that this was happening. So it was really easy to sort of be like, oh, like you see this thing that's happening on TV, this is because of climate change. Or like, oh, you see these people that are being impacted by all these like tornadoes, this is because of climate change. And then I think when you're like putting in the climate justice and environmental racism aspect of it, it's definitely a little bit harder. Like I said, a lot of people are just like, okay, climate change, the world is just gonna end and that's just what's gonna happen. But honestly, what's gonna happen is like the world's gonna stay here. It's just gonna be totally different and have like 0 people on it. And that's like what we don't want. So when you're like talking about how different communities are being impacted, it's really easy to be like, or it's a really easy way for me to do it is to be like, okay, do you see how like this area has a predominantly people of color in this area, and this area has predominantly like white people, and how these different like how they're being impacted by climate change really differently, and sort of like spelling that out. Some peers are going to be like, okay, whatever, that has nothing to do with me. But I think that when I tell them, okay, like the world is still going to be, the people aren't going to be here, sort of like gist that I have going. When I tell a lot of my peers that, they're like, okay, I kind of understand that now,
Yeah,
which is like an
very
easy way.
powerful.
Yeah.
That's very powerful. Thank you for that perspective. And thank you both for being here today, taking some time to talk to us and telling us about 0 Hour. Just with the last couple minutes here, if you could both just let the audience know how we can connect with you, how we can follow you and continue to stay involved in what it is that you two are heading up.
You can always follow us at This Is 0 Hour, or you can email me at kristen@thisis0hour.org. I spell my name with a K and an H, which is really different. So please, you shouldn't forget it, but yeah, that's it.
All righty. Well, awesome. Perfect. Thank you so much. And yeah, I look forward to following up with 0 Hour and doing the training course. I'll hand it over to you, Meg.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was an absolutely wonderful discussion to sit in on. Can we get a round of applause for this amazing panel?